Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Informed Decision webinar series. Today's session is the second session of the series, and the topic of today is going to be good governance in sports federations. As you can see, we are in a Zoom webinar platform, and this is exactly the same environment as during the upcoming AIBA Congress. So this may be a good test for some of the delegates that have already joined. This is a webinar and not a conference, so you will only see the speaker on your screen, but please note that we have simultaneous translation available into French and into Spanish, and you can set this up at the bottom of your screen. Today's webinar is going to last around 60 minutes, and all the attendees will be free to ask questions during this webinar and to interact via the chat function. As an alternative, you also have the possibility to raise your hand by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen. We will then try to hand over the floor to you so you can ask your question. Please do note that if you raise your hand, you will be able to ask your question in English only. So if you would like to ask a question in a different language, we would like to ask you to do that via the chat function. I would now like to hand over the word to Boris van der Vorst, President of the Dutch Boxing Federation and Chair of the EUBC Passion for Boxing Commission. Thank you very much and enjoy today's session.
Thank you very much, Carlijn, for this excellent introduction. And thank you very much also to those who joined today. It's another time for another informative event today, and I'm pleased to report that we have attendees from all corners of the globe once more. Yesterday, we spoke about the management of refereeing and judging with Patrick Vaida, the president of the International Federation of Sport Officials and EIBE Entourage Commission member. Patrick sent some powerful messages about the essential importance of fair bouts for the development of our sport and our international federation. He said that if there is no trust towards decisions in competition, then even with the most impressive and compliant statutes will not help. Today, I'm pleased to introduce an expert on governance of sports federation, Mr. Pim Verschuuren, who will try to argue the importance of statutes, governance processes, ethical standards, and so on. Mr. Verschuuren specializes in international sports governance, integrity, and geopolitics. He is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Lausanne, analyzing the implementation of whistleblowing policies within the sports sector. The research conducted by Mr. Verschuuren includes a program on the integration of sport in foreign policies of states. He advised the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the setting up of a specific French sports diplomacy. Mr. Verschuuren also worked at the European Commission's Directorate-General for External Relations, where he was responsible for the relations of the European Union with East Asia. He is a graduate of the Political Study Institute in Rennes and holds a Master 2 degree in Law and Politics of International Security from the Free University of Amsterdam. Mr. Verschuuren, welcome to the Informed Decision webinar series. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation to speak on this important subject for the boxing community.
Goeiedag. Hello everyone. Thank you very much. A pleasure to intervene. I will now try to share my screen so that you can see my...
But before starting, Pim, I want to emphasize the importance of this matter because the IOC inquiry committee report on AIBA clearly mentions today's subject of the webinar as one of the top concerns. It says that AIBA has continuously disregarded the basic good governance standards. So we all understand how important it is to learn more about the basics of good governance. I gladly hand over now the floor to you as expert, Pim, and encourage the audience to listen carefully to the presentation and get the questions ready for after your presentation.
Thank you very much. And indeed, if you have any question, I would be glad to try to answer them as much as I can. So let me try to share my screen here. Yes. Okay, can you see my slides now?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So again, hello to everyone. A pleasure to intervene on this, as you said, very important subject of good governance in international sports. We know here at research, the Lausanne University, that AIBA has been concerned by some governance issues, but unfortunately, it's not the only international federation concerned by that. So don't feel bad about it, because we know that many of the sports face the same issues over the last years. So it's a kind of common subject for international and also national sports. So just a quick word on myself. I just want to precise that I finished my PhD a few weeks ago. It was a difficult task, so I would like to underline the fact that my PhD is over. It was
congratulate.
Thank you. It was indeed a PhD on whistleblowing in international sports. So if you have any precise questions on that, I will no doubt try to answer them and share some documents if you wish to have some guidelines and recommendations on how to implement reporting mechanisms and whistleblowing systems to report doping, match fixing, or other type of issues like that. We'll come back to that. And also in the past, I worked a lot on the fight against match fixing, notably in football and tennis. But I know that, of course, boxing, like other disciplines, can be concerned by that. So if you have any questions on match fixing and betting, these are also some of my specialties. So I'll be, again, honored and glad to answer your questions on these aspects. So today I have around 30-40 minutes to talk to you about governance, good governance. And I choose to title this presentation, the what, the why, and the who of sports governance. So let's start. As you know, if it's today on the topic of the webinar, good governance, it's also a subject that we see so much in the media, in sports, but also outside of sports. I think it's like issues of democracy, transparency, integrity, sustainability. It's one of the key issues today that sports, but not only sports, also public and other private organizations have to face and have to take into account. And sports organizations, but also companies, public administration, for many of them, it took a long time to understand not only what is good governance, who should deal with it, but like I said, also, why do we need to respect some good governance principles? So I think we can agree on that. But then we have to define exactly what we are talking about when we mention the word governance. Governance, it comes from the French word saying gouvernement. And it was an old French word that was first used in the Kingdom of France to describe the government of a special territory in the north of France, where a special governor was seated and had to deal with other stakeholders. And still today, governance, although we don't have a clear, unanimous definition across the literature and across the industries, we use the word governance to describe a situation where you have to govern with the help of other stakeholders. And especially we use that in the political science in the 1990s to say that governance, it's a new way of governing, because we know that states today, countries, the public administration cannot only by themselves deal with issues like climate change, corruption, organized crime, and that they have to have a kind of deal and negotiate, take into account the strengths of the private sector in particular. So that's why we talk about democratic governance and also corporate governance, meaning that a company today also has to know how to govern in a new way. And like the definition that I will use to define a governance, for me, governance is the management of management. So it's not how you run an organization, it's also how you control and manage the running of your organization. How you make sure that the steering process, the decision-making processes within your organizations are controlled, are monitored, and are optimized, making sure that your decisions within your organizations match the objectives of your organizations, and also take into account all the internal and external stakeholders of your organization. So if we go to the sports specific context, which I know is a specific context, we come back to that, compared to companies or compared to public administration, the word governance came about 20 years ago, especially after the 1999 Salt Lake City scandal that you may know touched the IOC and some IOC members, because there were some allegations that a number of members of the IOC were accepting bribes to attribute the Olympic Games to certain countries. I'm sure you have heard about this scandal 20 years ago. But since then, many other scandals have erupted. You know, the FIFA scandal in 2015 with the Blatter president. You know about the IWAF scandal, the athleticism, etc., etc. The IBU, the biathlon, and also AIBA, like you mentioned, Boris. So you see that over the last few years, especially since 2015, there's been a higher pressure over sports organizations because of this succession of scandals. And even, it's not only pressures. We have seen many international and national organizations, public organizations, governments, politicians, many commentators, journalists, academic experts calling for a global reform of sports. And what we have felt at the international level of sports, but also at many national levels, is that many commentators wanted, because of these scandals, to undermine the autonomy of sports. And you know more than me that the autonomy of sports organizations towards the public authorities is one of the key aspects of sports, the key aspects of the sports regulation. And that's why the IOC president in 2015 said enough is enough. And he also sold this concept of responsible autonomy, saying that, okay, we sports organizations at international level, but also at national level, we need to protect our autonomy, but we also need to deserve our autonomy. And so, talking to the United Nations General Assembly, Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC, said that we will keep the autonomy, but in exchange, we make sure that the governance of the sports is perfect, or the best we can. And that's why he talked about the responsible autonomy, because it's also the responsibility of sports organizations at national and international levels to make sure that the governance of sports is optimal, that it's a good governance. So, in the end, we talk a lot about governance. Yes, we need to respect integrity, we need to respect sustainability, we need to be transparent, we need to be democratic, we need to listen to the athletes. Okay, but I think the key slide in my presentation, the key aspect that I would like you to remember is this slide. Why do we need good governance? Why today do we have to make reforms to ensure that we respect some kind of universal standards of governance? And I think the first reason is that when we have some research to underline that organizations in sports, but also outside of sports, when they respect universal standards of governance or integrity, well, they are more performant, they are more efficient in targeting the goals and objectives of these organizations. We have many research in companies showing that good governance leads to better outcomes. But also we have a new sports literature underlying that also in sports federations, when they respect good governance, in the end, they have better outcomes, better performance. But it's not only that. It's also that if you have good governance, you are more likely to comply with the rules and regulations that apply to your organizations. Again, if you have good control and monitoring on your activities, if you have more transparent decision-making processes, for example, you're more likely to respect, again, the law and not be subject to investigations or have some forms of fraud or corruption within your organization. Third reason, very important as well, is to make sure that you as an organization, I'm quite sure that most of you are in association with members, if you have good governance, it's also a way to be better accountable towards your own members that finance you and that also represent you. It's also a question of accountability towards external stakeholders. As an organization, sports organizations, you have sponsors, you have an audience, you have people watching, following your competitions. And good governance, it's also a way to be better accountable towards the stakeholders and at least to be more aligned with what these stakeholders expect of you as a sports organization. And more generally, good governance is a way for you to engage yourself with your environment. And like you said, Boris, in the introduction, and like has been said yesterday in the webinar, it's also a way to build trust. And I think we have not talked about this concept already, but trust is one of the key issues today in boxing, but also outside of boxing, in sports in general. And good governance is a very efficient way to build this trust with your internal and external stakeholders. Because, as you know, sports governance, it's a complex world. I know that your sports organizations, you are not like companies. You cannot be associated to a company because, of course, you are a private association, but you are non-profit. And you also have a general claim of fulfilling societal values, solidarity, public values of integrity, local inclusion of population within the sports, protection. I mean, sports is more general. It has a very clear public dimension. That's why sports governance also includes democratic governance, almost like the public sector, although it's a private association. And I know that many national federations have an official recognition of their ministry in charge of sports, of their state, to administer boxing activities, boxing competition at a national level. So we are in a quasi-public domain. So that's why sports governance is very complex, and it's difficult to have good governance standards in such a specific context. So if we are asking, okay, I need to comply with good governance standards, but which standards? What are the indicators and the principles that I need to follow as a national or international organization? And over the last 20 years, we have again seen many publications, many different types of good governance measures. Here you have some on these slides, and you will get the slides in, I think, later on, so you can more deeply go into the details if you want. But we have the Council of Europe, which has issued some good governance principles for sports. We have the AGIS project. It was a team of researchers that said, okay, sports organizations need to comply with this set of standards. At many national levels, I know in the UK, in Belgium, but in other countries, often the ministry in charge of sports has also issued some indicators that national organizations, and especially federations, have to comply with. And if we go at the international level, and I think we need to go at this international level because today I know that we have many participants from around the globe, and we need to take into account also the cultural differences between all the countries. This is one of the most difficult aspects in building good governance metrics, good governance standards. And here we have some examples. The IOC has issued 10 years ago the basic universal principles of good governance in sports. And it has set these principles in the Olympic Charter. But today I would like to focus more on the ASWAF dimensions of good governance, and go in a little bit more in detail in these dimensions, because I think that these dimensions reflect better your situation as national sports organizations. The ASWAF, you may know it, it's a syndicate of international sports federation, and they've created a system of self-assessment. So they've created standards of good governance, and then they have asked the federations themselves to assess their own organization on the basis of these 5 dimensions that you see here, and 10 indicators per dimensions. Because of course, you can say that we need to be transparent, you need to be democratic, you need to respect integrity. But what does it mean in level, but also in the industry, about what is transparency? What are we talking about? What is integrity? There is no universal accepted definition of integrity. So that's why indicators are very important to make sure, and I think that you as well, if you in your organization, you want to follow and respect some good governance standards, the most difficult part, one of the most difficult parts, is to create some very precise indicators according to which you will be allowed, and you can after control your progress. And so the ASWAF, the Syndicate of International Federations, has made 3 different reviews of international sports federations. And today, these indicators that I will present right now more in detail are a kind of sports standard that national and international organizations should follow. And more at international level, and it concerns the AIBA as well in the future, the international federations are obliged to comply with these standards because, of course, that's the position of the IOC. The International Olympic Committee wanted to restore the reputation and credibility of international sports, and needed to make sure that the international federations, the ones at least that are present in the Olympic Games, need to respect a number of basic standards. Here you have some results. AIBA and other federations did not participate to this last review published in 2020, but you can see that they have put a breakdown of different federations in categories. You have first category that respects most of the standards, and you have 6 federations, and then you have different categories of federations that, according to their compliance to the good governance measures that ASWAF has built. If you want, we can go more in detail in the results later on. But right now, let's go into the 5 dimensions that ASWAF and the IOC has decided are the 5 dimensions that are most important for sports organizations. And that's why I will present them to you, as they, I think, concern your situations. Transparency, as I said, there is no universal definition of transparency. However, we know that transparency is very important because that's the way that your stakeholders, internal stakeholders, your members, or your external stakeholders, the public authorities, the sponsors, the broadcasters, will make sure that your decision-making process is not interfered by private interest, for example. That all your decisions, the way that you work as an organization comply with the objectives of the organization. So they have to, all the stakeholders, they need to access a certain level of information. And it's especially because of the federal associative nature of your organization. Most of you are a federation with members, and the members, because they pay as well, they need to make sure that your organization follows some good measures and is transparent about how it manages the most important activities. So you need to know where is the money going, the money at at the national federation. So that's why it's very important that you publish a certain number of financial information and the global situation of your organization. It's important that you publish as well a number of decisions. We see many cases where federations don't publish the results of some executive committees. And this is again a problem because it means that it can also create some suspicions and rumors, and transparency in this way can avoid the suspicions and the negative information about your organization. It's also quite important to show an annual activity report to show that the last year, the last 12 months, these are the activities that we have done to promote sports, to protect the athletes, the activities to develop sports, etc. So this is again a key good governance principle indicator. Also, it's very important to publish the rules and regulations of your national organization. The stakeholders need to know which rules apply to which specific subject. And again, very often the rules and regulations are not very clear. So again, the statutes, the rules, the regulations should be published at the national organization, but also at the international level. If we go to the second dimension, integrity is an even more global and fuzzy concept, and where again there is no definition. There is one definition that we can use is that integrity is the quality of being honest and coherent with your principles. And because you sports organizations, like I said, you have societal ambitions of solidarity, inclusion, non-discrimination, fair competition, so no doping, no match fixing. You need also to show your stakeholders that you are doing everything you can to make sure that the competition, the leaders of the national sports organizations follow integrity standards, guidelines, to make sure that, again, the institution, the competitions, and the people within the institutions follow the most important integrity guidelines. So what is the most important thing here that you have to remember? That first, you need to have good regulation in place. You need to regulate when you have an issue like harassment and abuse, a new topic today in sports. Then the first step is to create a disciplinary regulation where you will officially forbid such type of behavior. And this is the first step that will allow you then to investigate and sanction the people who are doing some wrongdoing, like harassment, but also match fixing and doping. You need also to make sure that you have compliance tools in place. And what is compliance tools? Is tools, measures to make sure that you monitor the competitions and the people and the institution within your jurisdiction, and that you will be able to detect and investigate and sanction when there is a case of integrity threat, like, for example, doping, match fixing, harassment and abuse, etc. Don't forget, and I think that you addressed that yesterday, that the uncertainty of the competition, but also the integrity of the institution today is one of the most important things today for stakeholders. And we have seen cases in cycling, we have seen cases in football. I don't know boxing enough, so I cannot say, but in other disciplines, we have seen championships, we have seen sports institutions, we have seen competitions where the public went away from the competitions because of this lack of integrity. So that's why integrity is one of the main pillars of the good governance system that you have to put in place. If we go to the third dimension, democracy. Why is democracy very important? Because it's the way, because you are federal, most of you are federation with membership, you need to make sure that the different views and opinions and interests within your membership are respected and protected at your national level. And this is democracy. It's the representation of stakeholders and opinions within your organization. So for that, you need first to make sure that the elections of the president, because it will be the election of the executive management of your organization, this election should be fair and transparent. That's how alternative views will be able to be debated, discussed within your organization. It's the key, for me, the key indicator within the democracy. But you also need due diligence. What is due diligence? Is to make sure that the candidates for the elections, for example, but also the most executive officials within your organizations respect some basic integrity aspects. They shouldn't have a position of conflicts of interest. They shouldn't have a past of corruption, for example. So again, due diligence is also very important to make sure that the people representing and governing your sports are of utmost integrity. You also need to have stakeholders representation within your organizations. And that is, for example, an athlete commission. Make sure that the athlete voice within your organization is at least expressed and then listened to. This is very important. And again, as I said, the rules against the conflicts of interest in sports, you always have conflicts of interest. This is very natural. You must make sure that the most basic conflicts of interest are not present within your organization, and that you have to need to have rules in place to make sure that the conflicts of interest will not interfere with your decision-making process. If we go to the next concept, development, this regards the social responsibility of your organization. You're not only like a company selling products or selling events, competitions. Like I said, you have a public dimension as a sports federation. That's why you need to be accountable, of course, and make sure that your impact, your activities respect principles of sustainability, legacy, the positive impacts of your national championships, other competitions. You need to go beyond the pure sports objectives, but also look at your integration within the society, the national society, and that is development. So it's about sustainability, of course, environmental impact, but also education. Make sure that the top athletes within your sports also have a kind of education, that you will think about their career after the sports. It's also about solidarity, and solidarity for me is one of the unique concept of sports when you compare to companies and public administration. You also need to make sure that you have social inclusion and solidarity within your national discipline. So again, a key aspect of the development pillar of good governance. And the last dimension of good governance I will present here today is the control mechanisms. This is to make sure that the decision-making process within your organization will not be unilateral. It will not be controlled by just one power or one person or one organ. You need to have checks and balances in place, like in a classical state or a democratic state, where you will have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary branch. You also need to have within a private organization a national federation. You also need to make sure that you have some controls, auditing, an ethics committee, for example, some kind of that the Congress also that you have at national level also need to be able to have sufficient power to oppose the national federation if it needs to be. I won't go into details in all, again, these indicators, but again, if you, in the questions you have, you want to go more in detail, maybe we can go back to it. So now just the last slide. You need also to think that good governance, I don't like this concept. We need to think about better governance, because there's not a universal standard of governance. You have cultural factors that are very important. Some disciplines are very specific. So we need to take that into account. So you cannot apply a universal standard of governance to all organizations. Organizations are some are very small, some are very big, some have more political dimension. So again, you need to take all that into account. That's why you need to adapt the principles and even the indicators to the specificities of the organizations that you want to assess. And that's why one recommendation that I often give is to not apply this universal grid of indicators uniformly to all organizations, but try to work individually, bilaterally with one organization and set some objectives to measure not standard of governance, but the progress of governance. Okay, we measure today your situation, we measure the situation in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, and we measure again the progress. How much you improved your governance, your decision-making processes, etc. So if we go to the who of governance, who is in charge of the governance of your organization in your national federation? Well, it's a little bit of everybody, because as you see in this, this is a classical model of governance in the literature, and all the levels of the organizations is in charge of the management of the management, because the executive managers are managed, of course, by the law, which says how you should behave as an organization, and also the regulator, if you're a private organization, for example, or the ministry. But as an executive manager, of course, you will also control the governance within your organization. So each levels need to be assessed by someone, so that to make sure that nobody will be free to do what it wants in the organization, to put it very simply. If I applied it to AIBA, it's an example. We could apply that to a national federation. But if we take the AIBA example, for example, you have the office in Lausanne, the administration of AIBA. Then you have the executive committee, which controls in a certain limit the daily activities of the office. Then you have the Congress. I don't know if it's an annual Congress or biannual Congress, but you have the Congress of members that, in theory at least, in the statutes, is in charge also of controlling the AIBA, because it's the assembly of the members. But it's not everything. Above AIBA and the AIBA Congress, you also have the applicable law, and especially the Swiss law, where AIBA is seated. Also the Olympic Charter, as we have seen, the IOC has also a way to make sure that the governance of AIBA is compliant with some standards. We see that. So this is a pyramid to show you that the governance is not, if you cannot create just one officer that will be in charge of within your organization dealing with governance. It's a global organizational concept where everyone needs to be involved in the control of the governance. But you also, like I implied it in my presentation, you also need to go beyond governance, because ticking the boxes of indicators is not enough. 10 years ago, before the FIFA scandal, FIFA had the second best score in the ASWAF review of governance. And this was just before the scandal of 2015, where we have seen from the FBI investigation that a lot of corruption problems were present within FIFA. So complying with governance standards is not enough. You need to make sure that all the levels of your organization, but also your members, comply with the set of rules that you give, that you publish. And for that, you need what? You need leadership involvement. It seems common sense, but very often we see organizations that set up a new regulation, a new constitution, for example, but then it remains like a document on the website, and it has no impact on the daily activities and no impact on the decision-making process. The leaders, the top of the organization, the executive branch, has a key impact on making sure that the regulation that you set in place are trickled down to all the levels of your federal pyramid. So the regional associations, the local clubs as well, need to, in a way, to comply with your regulation. Otherwise, your statutes and constitution will not have any impact. So you need to remember that all this takes time and resources and engagement. You cannot change a culture of an organization in a few months or even a few years. It takes a lot of time. We see that in companies, we see that in public administration, and of course, sports has some resistance to change, like other organizations, because there is a specific culture, because there are rules that are in place in sports. So again, as a national federation, think about a long-term process. And like yesterday, you have seen, trust takes time to build it. Good governance, integrity and compliance, again, takes time. But you have no choice today. Like we see in the scandals at international and national levels, you have to change yourself. Otherwise, like I said, the autonomy of sports may be undermined, jeopardized, if the sports cannot reform itself. So I want to conclude with this slide and come back to the why, because often we apply integrity and governance reforms, but we do that, it becomes an end in itself. We apply measures, but then we forget about them. Think that good governance, like integrity, democracy, transparency, it has some key impact. You will engage with your stakeholders at internal and external levels, and you will also optimize the way that you will optimize your performance. This is something that we have seen outside of sports and that we also see within sports. Good well-governed organizations, better governed organizations are more performant. Thank you very much for your attention. I went quite fast, so if you want to come back to some aspects, it will be a pleasure to discuss with you either now or via my email address. Don't hesitate if you have some questions. Thank you.
Pim, first of all, thank you very much for this valuable and interesting knowledge that you share with us. And before Carlijn asks some questions from the audience, I would like to ask some questions I noted during your presentation. Is that okay?
Please, thanks.
Yes. There's something that we discussed yesterday a little, but there is such an essential subject that we should discuss regularly. You mentioned your PhD is whistleblowing. And let's say that we have a hotline in place and there's a report on wrongdoing, but it's not supported by evidence. How should the International Federation act in this case?
Thanks. Yes, it's a very common question by sports organizations. And of course, when a whistleblower comes with some allegations, it's very difficult to investigate if you have no proof. In some cases, you have several whistleblowers. One will blow the whistle on national level, one will do it at international level. And if you manage to have exchange of information and cooperation, you can also connect the dots. If you have different whistleblowers giving allegations on, for example, a club, it can be a way for you to start an investigation, even if you have no evidence. But again, I agree, if you have one guy who says this manager is doping, it's very difficult to act, especially as an international federation, because you have less control and power on the ground. So yes, whistleblowing systems, they work mostly when, again, you have evidence. Many cases you have no evidence, but in some cases you have. And I think it's very important when you have a whistleblower who gives an allegation allegation without proof, it's important that you communicate with him and also that you explain why you cannot act on this information, because otherwise there's a possibility that afterwards he will go to the media and say, I contacted AIBA, I contacted my national federation, and they didn't act on it. So one of the basic steps is also to have a good communication with the whistleblower to explain what you need to start an investigation, and if he cannot bring that, why you cannot act on his alert.
Okay, thank you. One other question, and then can Caroline ask some questions from the audience. Another question for your specialty. In boxing, we have an issue where the referee and judges are very dependent on national federations. Unfortunately, the international and continental federations cannot provide enough financial incentives to the referee and judges. So how do we encourage the officials to report pressure and wrongdoings?
It's a very difficult question. Thanks. The golden answer for this type of questions, of course, is prevention. Try to involve the referees, the pool of referees, and explain to them why such pressures are bad and why they need to be involved in the protection of the integrity of boxing. And for that, and I link to the first question, you also need to have good whistleblowing procedures. Because if a referee from this nationality wants to give information about the national pressures, but the national pressures, they will come from maybe a top executive of the boxing community. So if you want him to report to your organization pressures and bribes, for example, you need to have a golden standard, the top of the art whistleblowing system, where it will be sure that you will be anonymous, perhaps, or confidential at least, that he will have some ways of protection, and that he will trust, again, this concept of trust, that he will trust AIBA or National Federation, that they will not communicate the information that he provides to the concerned parties. So yes, this is my answers: prevention and a very good whistleblowing system.
Okay.
I know it.
Also, I think that communication is key in every crisis. I agree for that. Yes.
Of course. And you need to use crisis to show that you, as a boxing organizing federation, you will change. You know, when you are in a crisis, you also have a platform to communicate and to use crisis to implement thorough change.
Okay, thank you. Caroline, I have some other questions, but maybe it's good to give the floor for the audience.
Yes, of course. Pim, before I start reading out the questions, may I ask you to stop sharing your screen so that the attendees can see you both again?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Then the first question. Some international federations are now formed as companies, LTDs, like International Tennis Federation, and at the same time highly ranked as ASOIF. What are the benefits of that?
Tough questions. Well, I don't know exactly the benefit. I think the benefits when you're putting yourself in the corporation status is in the organization of the events, the championships. In tennis, it's also the Grand Slams, the Davis Cups, and all the. When you're corporations, it's easier to have a lucrative activity that you can then redistribute to the mother federation. Because in tennis, you also have other organizations that are part of the family. So I think it's when federations switch to a lucrative status, is to facilitate the commercial activities linked to the sports events. This is my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. The other question is, can an investor or a creditor be an executive committee member?
You mean, well, it depends on the statutes, of course, but then I think the question is, should an investor or creditor be an executive committee member? for me, if you are bold enough to invite external stakeholders to your executive committee, I think it provides a positive step. Then,
Pim, one thing. I think that this question is related to conflict of interest.
yes,
you understand?
Then, of course, there is a basic conflict of interest. Normally, I don't know the statutes within the boxing at international or even at national levels, but I think such types of presence may be forbidden. If you have investors or creditors on your committee members, again, you need to make sure that you have conflicts of interest rules to make sure that when some decisions impact this investor or creditors, they don't have a voting power, for example.
Okay. Carlijn, that was it?
Yes, that was it from my side.
I said, thanks. I have a few questions, not so tough, I hope, for you as the previous one. For the executive board meetings, should the entire transcript be published or just the decisions to be really compliant and transparent?
Again, for me, there's no perfect rule. If you manage to, I think that WADA publish, for example, the World Anti-Doping Agency publishes the discussions within the executive board committee. So for me, it's a very good sign that it shows that the different representatives of the sports family at the board, how they behave within the organization, within the committee, are transparent. For me, it's good. I understand why so many organizations don't want to publish the minutes of the committees. So then, at least the decision, for me, it's the minimal standard. It's the minimal decision in the, yeah.
Okay, clear. And about the participation of athletes in the governance. In AIBA, we finally have 2 voting EC members who are athletes, representatives of the Athletes Commission. But there's so much politics and so much, let's be frank, negativity around the AIBA EC. How do we protect these athletes and at the same time give them a voice?
You mean because the athletes don't want to have their reputation tarnished by AIBA?
Yes.
How to protect them? Again, to make sure that these athletes are well chosen. I don't know how you will choose the athletes, but I think this is a very difficult question for many federations that come to us and say that we have a problem with athlete representation. It's not particular to AIBA. I know that some federations manage to make the athletes vote in an international championship. I think this will be one of, I don't know how it will be at the AIBA. Will it be a vote?
Again?
Will the athletes who will sit at the committee be elected by the athletes?
Yes.
Okay. I think this is one way to protect them, because they will not represent AIBA, they will represent the athletes community. Again, yeah, on this aspect, I believe that communication will be very important for them to tell the public and also the internal stakeholders, the athletes population, that they will come to within the AIBA committee to represent their interest. It's like a deputy member of the parliament that will have to go to his regional constituency and explain to what extent he will defend the interest of the region and the population of the region. I think the athletes have to make some work on that. And it's difficult. It's like the democracy. Huh? It's a politician work, but it's important in this context. Yeah.
Pim, I saw some question was also from the audience. Carlijn, can you ask it? Thank you for responding, Carlijn.
Yes, of course. We indeed have another question. Do you believe that rights transfer deals and large loans should be approved by the executive committee and announced to the membership of an international federation?
You mean that when there's a transfers between athletes, right? Between boxers, or I know it's rights transfers. It's about, I don't really understand the question, I'm sorry.
I think it's about the media rights.
Okay, the
Commercial
media.
and media rights.
This could be a way, if national federations want to make themselves compliant and controlled by the international federation. I mean, I think that's the question. Yes, I think this is a very good way if the international federation controls the major national transfer deals. I think this is the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are there more questions, Carlijn?
Yes, I see another one. How do we get all federations to buy into good governance? The message today is clear, but how do we hit all four corners of the globe? We need this to inform the IOC of collaborative work and practice.
Mm-hmm. You know, the IOC, it's a good way to contact, it's a good idea to contact the IOC. Why? Because I know that right now they are working with all the NOCs of the world. So they have the same problem as AIBA. They have to work with very different cultural contexts, very different organizations. And I know that what they're doing right now is regional webinars, regional conferences where they help NOCs to have good governance in place, Pacific regions, Latin America, Europe, etc. This is one way in terms of architecture. And then I think that you be also flexible in the standards and the indicators. Like I said in my presentation, you need to adapt the indicators because you won't put the same standards to the US Boxing Federation and to some small countries in Asia or Africa or in Europe. So you need to be flexible in that. But you need to have monitoring still. For any federation, you need to have some form of monitoring to make sure that there is a progress. But again, this is the difficult part of international sports. You are always at the level of your lowest denominator.
Clear. There will be now a question in French about
Yes.
cooperating with FIDA. Can you?
I'm French speaking, so I can translate. Why can't we work with the International Federation of Referees and WIDA to frame the officials and judges in major competitions to guarantee impartiality? Oh, it's translated as well. Sorry. Yes, for me, I have to be frank. I didn't know that the referees in boxing at international level had so much link with their national federation. Yes, I can only recommend to have an international level of frame for referees, whether it should be a tough commission with some budget to have training, prevention, communication with referees, and to better finance and train the referees that will officiate in the major competitions.
Okay, clear. Those were the questions? Okay, thank you. And Pim, I'm really extremely glad to start this dialogue openly today, and I hope that you can help us again in the future. It is, for us, it's very important to involve experts like you and Mr. Vaida to help us, to bring us further. These cooperations are really important for AIBA. And perhaps when we get the basics in order, you can help us in directing further. After all, excellent governance, better, good governance is not about a single great act, you mentioned also today, but about consisting, upholding ethical and professional standards in everything that we can do. And thank you also, Pim, and also to the attendees for your initiative and desire to receive independent expert advice today. I would like to remind you that we have a third informed decision webinar on business development of sports federations on December 10, Thursday at 2:30 London time, with Alexander Kucherevi, the top manager in UEFA responsible for business development of national federations. For now, Pim, for you and also attendees, stay healthy and positive, and see you soon. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you all.